Hi, my name is Susan Bradley. I work in development here at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, and we'd like to welcome you. This is a special evening with Jane Smiley tonight. Welcome to Jane. We're excited to have her speak about her new book, Perestroika in Paris. If you'd like to purchase the book, it is available at the store, and you can call or go online to do so. We'd also like to thank Cheese Shop, who designed a special cheese platter for us today. Thank you very much, and thank you to those who supported the cheese shop and supported the museum by buying this. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Patsy Hicks, our Director of Education. Welcome, Patsy.
Thank you, Susan. And I have to say that cheese plate looks pretty fantastic. I think we all wish we had that sitting in front of us right now with perhaps a glass of wine, which I think was also something they provided. I know Jane is a Diet Coke fan, but she assured me that that is filled with water because she's had her quota for the day. So we all know how that goes with caffeine. It's just such a pleasure to welcome all of you members, and we're excited to be partnering with development to see how this goes. It's great to see you again, Jane. It's been just a little over a year, I think, since you were in our auditorium. You all remember the auditorium? And we could be together. And I've already, assured Jane that a year from now, she's invited back, with a book or without. So welcome to all. This event is celebrating her latest book, Perestroika in Paris, a book that has been described as a balm for harsh times. It's a joyful, captivating tale, is part of a rich and varied body of work by a multi-talented author. As Pico Iyer wrote, "Is there anything Jane Smiley cannot do?" To remind you of just a few of her accomplishments. Jane Smiley is the author of numerous novels, including 1,000 Acres, which was awarded the Pulitzer Prize, and most recently, the Last 100 Years trilogy, Some Luck, Early Warning, and Golden Age. She is also the author of several works of nonfiction and books for young adults. A member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, she has also received the Penn Center USA Lifetime Achievement Award for Literature. She lives in Northern California. She is an enthusiastic chef. I have borrowed her recipes, and she is at the moment listening for some onion soup that is cooking in her kitchen. She's a lover of animals, especially horses, a knitter of sweaters, and a generous conversationalist, as you will shortly see. We ask that you submit your questions anytime throughout the next half hour by typing them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will select from these, and Jane will respond in the final 15 minutes of our time together. So again, welcome members, welcome Jane. And Jane, do you want to start us off with reading something?
Yes, I'll read the beginning. I don't like to give spoilers on this book, especially, so I'll just start from the beginning.
Sounds good.
And sometimes I go on too long, so you can tell me to shut up.
I'll just go like this.
Paris had won her race. She had jumped all the jumps with a great deal of pleasure, and she thought in excellent form. The number 2 horse, a chestnut gelding from down south somewhere, had been so far behind her that she hadn't been able to hear his hoofbeats on the turf. And of course, the crowd was yelling too. She had, she thought, almost danced across the finish line. Everyone was happy. The jockey did a backflip off her. I have to say that's something I cannot do. The jockey did a backflip off her. The groom gave her a kiss, and Delphine, her trainer, gave her a hug and 3 lumps of brown sugar, not to mention an excellent feed of carrots, when she was all cool and calm after the race. Since it was the last race of the day, and indeed the year, it was early November, the van, which already had its 4 horses, had left before her race began, so as to come back and get her. But now the van was late, the stable was empty, and Rania, her groom, had, she said, gone to the bathroom, and why not in the stall, thought Paris, but she could never get an answer to this question. Twilight, was descending over the vast green expanse of Auteuil racecourse. The jumps had dimmed into dark shapes against the still vivid green grass. Admiring this, Paris did something that she often did. She pressed against the door of the stall, and this time something happened that had never happened before. It swung open. After a moment, Paris stepped carefully out into the fine, crunchy gravel and snorted. Everything remained quiet. She could see now that every stall was empty and dark. In fact, the green of the racecourse was the brightest color around. So bright that for a moment she didn't dare head out there. But Paris was a very curious filly. At her feet were several items that Rania had left behind. The grooming box full of brushes, Paris's blue blanket, and something that Paris knew was called a purse. This was the only thing that interested Paris. She had seen lots of purses and heard even more about them. She had, in fact, just won a purse, and so she thought this would certainly be it. She dropped her nose, snuffled a bit, and found the handle. She picked it up and trotted out of the stable yard onto the race course. Really, she thought, for a horse who had just run a long race with 14 jumps, she felt quite full of beans. She kicked up her heels and gave a squeal. To begin with, Paris had no idea of making a getaway. Not only did she like racing, and Delphine and Rania and her owner, Madeline, and several of the other horses, as well as her nice clean stall up there in Maison Lafitte, she really didn't know much else. None of the horses did. All had been born on pleasant farms in the country, and all had come to Maison Lafitte when they were hardly more than babies, and all had been galloping and eating and riding in the van and racing and galloping and eating and racing for quite a while, as long as Paris could clearly remember, actually. It was an active life. And in Maison Lafitte, there was plenty to see of a morning, especially if you raced over the jumps. But the horses did talk among themselves about what else might be out there. Some worldly ones who had traveled from down south or from across the sea had seen different courses. They lorded it over the others a bit. There were also those who talked about escaping this life, but they never talked about what else they might do. Paris did not think that any of them were as curious as she was. And here was the grass, turf they called it, but grass, really as thick and green and appetizing as it could possibly be. And a racehorse never got to eat a strand of it, never even thought of doing such a thing. A race course was for racing. Paris took a few bites. It has to be said that the grass was delicious, sweet, fragrant, flavorsome, and a little fruity tasting. A mouthful was excellent chewing, not too light, but not at all tough like hay, and it was nice to bite off the living stalks. She walked along, nibbling, occasionally trotted, occasionally kicked up her heels, and even reared twice just for the fun of it. She was careful to keep track of her purse, though, and always circled back to retrieve it before she got too far away. Pretty soon, it was completely dark. Paris didn't mind. She could see quite well in the dark. She romped and grazed and minded her purse, sniffed a jump here and there, and recalled her race. She inspected interesting herbs and bushes, got into the woods. And then there she was, at the side of what she knew was a road. Roads were for vans. She had traveled many a road. Across the road were several interesting sights, more trees, more paths, some tall buildings. Another road that ran between them. Cars, she was quite familiar with cars, parked and quiet beside the buildings. Here and there, the buildings were lit up. There was grass. And it was that at the end that lured her across the road. Her shoes rang on the pavement with a pleasing resonance. She lifted her tail and arched her neck and blew out her nostrils a few times. Soon she had left the park far behind.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful choice because it introduces us so beautifully to Paris. And I loved in the book the way the line or some version of she was a curious filly. She was a very curious filly, almost like in fairy tales or folk tales when a descriptor is repeated.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering what made you decide that curiosity would be her motivation? Not desire for change or feeling she wanted to escape being trapped, but curiosity.
Well, she is based on my own horse, who's no longer a filly, I'm sorry to say, but who is very curious. And she's the type of horse who, if she sees a mounting block with a lid, she'll go over and open the lid and check what's in it, And one time, I suppose it was because I didn't lock her stall. I don't know why it was, but one time she did get out of her stall. And unlike some of the horses who run off, she just walked down the aisle, looking at this and looking at that. She likes to see things. She likes to sniff things. So she's a curious. Well, she would say she's a filly, but we know she's a mare.
So a lot of this comes from observation of your own
Yeah.
world.
She's
But I'm
vain.
also
She's vain, though. I have to say that she's very vain. But that's okay.
well, you give Paris such a wonderful character. It sounds like with good inspiration. But I'm also wondering how you decided on the city of Paris as your setting. How did that come about?
Well, this was a long time ago. This was about in 2009. And Paris at that point was 4 years old, and she had been to a racetrack. And I think over the course of her three runnings, she had beat one. She'd come second to last one time. So we knew she wasn't going to be a racehorse, but I was very fond of her. Anyway, I was visiting a very interesting American woman who has a racing stable outside of Paris. And we happened, after visiting her, to go to a place I hadn't been before, which is up on the west side of the Seine, called the Place de Trocadero. The west side of the Seine is really beautiful, and it's interesting because it's up a hill, and so you can see the regular Paris very well from that area. It's quite beautiful. And we were having a wonderful French onion soup, actually, at a patisserie or cafe in the Place de Trocadero. And I said to my husband, what would be fun? If Paris escaped into France, or escaped into Paris. If she was here and escaped into Paris. And I said, oh, that's not going to work. And then I couldn't resist, it just seemed like so much fun. And it did involve a lot of research, and had to go to Paris and eat a lot of things. But I also got to walk around a lot in places that I didn't know well. And that was really fun.
Well, when you mentioned the research, the other thing that struck me was that in all the wonderful animal characters, they all have distinct personalities, but there also seems to be scientific knowledge behind them, which made me want to go, do a little research, especially the rats, who are very likable in this.
They are, yeah.
And they have this kind of sixth sense, or this vibration thing. Is that your imagination, or is that actually some kind of scientific truth?
No, I made that up, but I did have to. I quite enjoyed the rats. There's two of them. One's an older rat, and one is a young rat who really wants to find a mate, and which for rats is called a doe. And one of the things that fascinates me about rats is they seem to know what's going on. And I decided, I made up this power that they had to detect things with their whiskers. And I mean, obviously they can see things too, but I thought, well, and this is a black rat, not a brown rat. This is a small rat. And I thought, as a small animal, he would really have to be alert and have to be able to see what's coming and what might be happening. So that part I did make up.
And then the raven is, He reminds me of many people that I know, actually. You want to talk a little bit about his character? I won't name names.
Well,
Very talkative.
when I've been in Paris, especially on the west side, I've seen a lot of ravens, and you can hear them cawing constantly. So when I was researching ravens, they do have very active social lives, and they do have struggles, power struggles, and they do have what you would call lifelong mates. And I thought they were quite interesting, and so I did whatever research I could, and then tried to make the raven as plausible as I could.
Well, he's quite well read, and
Well, I don't know that he's well read, but he would love to read if he could. He's been known in the book at one point. He does fly in through an open window and peck at some of the books. If only.
One of the many fun things about the story is the way it moves between what seems to be highly imaginative and unlikely to happen to something that seems very plausible, and I think it's because of your being constantly in touch with what's real, even in the midst of this kind of fabulous story in terms of animal behavior, but also in terms of human behavior. So I'm wondering if you want to say a little something about the humans you introduce into the story and kind of how that balances out.
Well, I knew that once she got into town, even though it's late winter and it's very dark a lot of the time, and there aren't going to be as many people in the Champ de Mars running or hiking or whatever. I knew that once she got into town, there were going to be practical issues that had to be solved, and that some humans were going to have to solve them. So one of the humans is the groundskeeper for the Champ de Mars, and he can see her droppings. It's not like she's putting them in a corner or anything, but I had to give him a reason for just putting up with this. And then another thing that she had to do was get something to eat. And so I figured, all right, I'll put in a woman who works in a bakery, who makes pastries in a bakery. And I'll give her a reason for giving Paris some grain from time to time. So there she was. So that was fun. And then now that I've gone back several times to the Champ de Mars, and things have changed slightly, but there was a house that I noticed that looked very old and had huge amount of brush over a very tall fence. And so I imagined the inside of this house. And I thought, okay, who would be the most likely to be interested in a horse? And I thought it would be a kid. So I made it a boy. And he needed a reason not to be supervised. And so I gave him an extremely old great-grandmother who has taken care of him for a number of years. And now that he's about 8, he's the one who kind of takes care of her. But she does have plenty of money because she comes from a wealthy family. So I just had to put in the women, the humans had to be plausible. And then I had to just hope for the best in terms of whether readers would accept them or not.
Well, it's wonderful the way it seems to me, through the way they interact with the animals, reveal something about the human character, and also the fact that you point out from time to time through different characters, animals, how human beings don't pay any attention, how it is possible for for a horse to walk by and have no one comment on it because they're wrapped up in their own thoughts.
Or they're reading the paper, or they're looking at their feet, hoping not to slip in the mud, So I just tried to do the best I could. At one point, one of the characters has a theory Well, the Champ de Mars used to be a place where the French military cavalry drilled. And that's why it's so enormous. And I thought, okay, so some people would know that. And because the École du Militaire is at the far end. And I figured, well, why not have a horse in a place where there were used to be a lot of horses? So,
Yeah, it does make perfect sense.
but I have to say one thing. I did, before I turned it into my publisher, I handed it to my French translator. And I said, you really have to read this and tell me if it works, you know. And she quite loved it. So I took that as a yes and turned it into my publisher.
Well, I was going to ask if you speak French. Do you?
Un peu.
Moi aussi. And that's about it. So, but it comes through, just as it comes through that you have an awareness of animal behavior, of human nature. It also comes through that you have a sense of kind of French humor and the way things might be looked at. It comes across as a French story, you know, not an American story. And it also comes across, I said this before, as timeless to me. I had to keep reminding myself that it was, you know, roughly 2009, I guess, that it's supposed to be happening. And I'm wondering, because so many of the reviews that I've read and the interviews that I've heard have commented something along the lines of, this is the book we need right now, primarily because it is full of joy and delight, which is a word we don't use very often. But you started writing this before we kind of went into the period.
I just wrote it for fun. But about a year and a half ago, I said to my publisher, and they'd already contracted for it. It was just sitting around waiting. And I said, why don't we publish this around the time of next year's election? Just because people might want something to read that isn't political. And a lot of my previous work has been political in all different ways. And so I thought, well, this would be a little break for everybody. And then it turned out, and then COVID came around, and then it turned out that, yeah, that was the right time to publish it.
And did you have fun writing this one?
Oh gosh, I adored it. It was like this French vacation for me, and I loved the animals, and I loved having them talk, and I liked I like the human characters too. And I loved just going back to Paris and walking around and saying, okay, is it plausible for this to happen here? And, you know, all that stuff. That was really a lot of fun too.
Well, it comes across that you're having fun when you're writing it. And, you know, I'm wondering, because you go from these very serious, very lengthy, historically related, you know, Icelandic saga, you know, family tragedies, these kinds of stories, into something like this. Do you deliberately pace yourself back and forth, or just kind of whatever
comes up or seems interesting is what I do? So I would say that I write out of curiosity, and I also love to read, and I also love to explore, and so almost always some idea pops into my head. And I think, oh, that would be interesting. I remember I was in LA with a friend of mine who's also a writer named David Francis. He's from Australia. And must have been 2008 or 9 or something like that. And we were just sitting in a restaurant. And I said, you know, I should write this book. I should write this series of books called The Last 100 Years. And it should go year by year from 1920 to 2019. And he leaned forward across the table and he said, don't tell anybody else that idea. And I thought, oh, that's a good review. And then I got into it, and I really enjoyed writing that. But all of them have come to me in a different way. The only one I ever really planned ahead about writing was the Greenlanders. And that was because in college and in graduate school, I read a lot of Norse sagas. I learned a lot about the origins of the English language, and it really fascinated me. It's also true that in ninth grade, when I was a kid, we read Giants in the Earth by Ole Rolvag, and I'd never read anything like that. And that sort of put me on the path to the Nordic way. And then when we were studying the Norse sagas, I learned about Greenland, and I thought, and there were sagas about the origin of Greenland, the origin of the Norse colony in Greenland, but nobody knew what happened to it or the details. They knew it disappeared, but they didn't know the details. And so I knew from, say, earliest graduate school that I wanted to write about that. So I planned ahead on that one. But the others have more or less just come as ideas. And I would say, oh, that's interesting. And then just kept on going. I've never really written about myself or my life or anything.
I'm starting to hear embedded in what you're saying that you are a curious filly as well.
Well, I'm no longer a filly, but then neither is Paris.
Because it does seem like your curiosity is driving you. But I'm wondering, with this myriad of ideas that, over the years must have been multiplied by many that you didn't follow up, how do you keep all that? Like, do you write them down? Do you revisit them? Like, how do they pop back up and you think, like, now's the time to do that one?
Well, I probably do I do some research. And then if the research is interesting enough, I just keep going with it. In my experience, you have an idea and you think, oh, that's interesting. And then you start doing some research, and then you proceed very slowly. And then you speed up the more you know. And then at some point, you know enough to kind of take off and just write steadily. But you still have to find out some things that you didn't know. And so you have to go back and do some more research. But I love doing research, so I never mind having to do more research.
So
one of my favorite ways of doing research is to visit a place, the place where it's set, because I think that's very revealing in terms of how whatever plot I've come up with might play out. And quite often the place that it's set isn't what I had imagined it would be. And so it's quite illuminating to visit those places. And that's one of my big pleasures.
So is it fair for me to ask you about the book you said you were working on next that moves towards a mystery, and the place where that would be taking place? Or do you not want to go there?
No, I don't mind. Yeah, I decided I was going to write a murder mystery set in Monterey in the 1850s. I think the 1850s. I've already written about the 1850s in the All True Travels and Adventures of Liddy Newton. But I think the 1850s in California are uniquely interesting because of the founding of California, because of the people coming, because of San Francisco. And Monterey is a quite well-preserved early town with a lot of buildings that were built here in the 1830s and 40s. And it's fascinating to walk around. And of course, everybody knows that it's a really beautiful spot. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to see if I can do this murder mystery. And then the more I did it, the more I walked around and looked around town, the more interesting it got for me. So I did it.
Is it a mystery that's based on an actual murder that happened?
Mm-mm. Nobody in Monterey admits that an actual murder happened.
And during COVID, because of restrictions of travel, did that make it easier for you to go to Monterey and, to be closer to that environment rather than Paris or something like that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, and Monterey is a totally interesting place to walk around, not just for the buildings, but also for the natural setting and the ravines. And one of the things that totally fascinates me is how every ravine is different from every other ravine. You know, and you stand on the edge of the road and you look down the ravine and you think, wow, that is amazing. So there's never a moment when I walk around Monterey or Carmel Valley or whatever and say, this is getting boring. Every time it's, oh, I never noticed that before. So it's a great place to walk and live and go.
Well, that being keyed into observation and noticing details is, you know, such a rich part of what you write as well. So I can see, you know, many of us would walk by a ravine and say, there's another ravine, and not notice the differences. So I think that is why you are who you are and we are who we are.
Well, here's an example. So there's a road that I had been up years ago, and I went up it again a few weeks ago. And it's kind of in Carmel Valley, kind of near Mid Valley, but it's a very windy road. So if you want to look at stuff, you have to you have to go slow. But one of the things I hadn't realized was that there were those big redwoods. I didn't realize the redwoods were in that ravine. I thought the redwoods started up more toward Santa Cruz. So here we are in Monterey. I've been here for years. I didn't even realize we had redwoods. So there's an example of something that I hadn't noticed before.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I think we have a number of people who want to ask questions, but I'm going to just maybe go to two more little points that I loved about the Paris book. And one of them is that there's these kinds of, and I said this to you the other day when we spoke, there are these almost like aphorisms of how to live your life that come up through the mouths of the animals. But you know, there was one where I can't even remember what character it is, if it's Paris or if it's Frida, but it's like, why are you always, you know, looking for things, or why are you, and it's like, I don't know, you know, and I feel like that's the way a lot of we humans are. We get, you know, we spin around in our own tails and we don't know why. Or my very favorite line in the whole book, and I've used it in a couple conversations today with my family, is the one at the very end of the book, which says, why make things more complicated than they really need to be? It's just such a great attitude. And I love the fact that in this book, everybody helps everybody. There's no real villain. There's sorrow, and there's some danger, and there's change, and there's the push-pull between comfort and freedom. Mm-hmm. But it's generally such a positive book. And so my last question to you is, Jane Smiley, are you an optimist?
I'm, you know, I have to say I am. I mean, I have these moments of fear. I mean, I grew up during the Cold War, and my earliest memories include, okay, are those bombs here yet? You know, are the missiles launched yet? But I guess because the bombs never arrived and the missiles were never launched, knock on wood, things have turned out really well. So I guess I have been an optimist. I do believe that one of the secrets of having a good life is to do your best to make the best of your own circumstances. And I think that's one of the secrets to writing novels too. You pick the material, and then you make the best of your material. And you don't say, oh, darn it, this is going to be embarrassing, or this isn't going to work, or something. You just keep on trying to make the best of it. And you acknowledge the fact that no novel is perfect, and that you have to do the best you can, and then you have to let it go.
Very sage words. Well, let me go now. I'm going to go into the Q&A section and see what awaits us there. So this is from Christine. She says, you created such interesting and true personalities for the various animals and birds. You know a lot about horses, but how do you know so much about querulous and overly cautious ducks, educated ravens, and compassionate and bold dogs?
Well, Frida is our dog, or was. She's now passed on. She was about 16 when she passed, but she was a totally interesting dog. And you would say, oh, she's so kind, she's so kind, she's not a hunting dog. But then you'd go to the beach and she'd catch sight of a gull out of her eye and she'd just go for it. And once she even caught one. I don't know how she did that, but she was a very sweet, interesting dog. She got along well with the other dogs. She was a great howler. If I was playing the banjo, like she would howl, and she always was in tune. So that was our dog. The other animals, I just noticed what I saw in Paris, and then I looked them up and tried to make them tried to portray them in an accurate way.
You didn't ask the advice of a natural history person or a zookeeper
Uh-huh.
or anything like that. You just relied on your own research.
Yeah, there's plenty of stuff to read about animals, and so it wasn't hard.
Well, a follow-up question to that was from someone who said, what did my dog think of the books? And speaking of dogs, she is very present behind me, and she seems very happy with her animal companions, and I don't think she'll be leaving our own particular backyard, but she does have many friends in the neighborhood, so I can relate to that. But it's funny that they've noticed her. And I guess I'm wondering, we have another question here that kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier in terms of why it resonates with us right now. This is from Patricia, and she says, thank you for this charming book. As I read it, I was struck by the lovely simplicity of the characters' lives and how a plus of the pandemic is that most of us have had to slow down and simplify our own lives.
Mhm.
You just said you wrote it before the pandemic, but it is a good reminder of how much we really need to live a full and rich life. So,
Yeah, do your own cooking. That's my only advice about how to live a full and rich life.
well, I agree with you, but you want to explain why you think that's true? There's more to it than that, I think.
Well, I think for me, cooking has been a way of exploring. I started out as a very picky eater. My mother would have been dumbfounded to learn that eventually I was going to eat, green beans, not to mention, onion soup. So I started out as a picky eater, and when I was after I graduated from college, my first husband and I, there weren't any jobs, so we took some money that we had saved, and we hitchhiked around Europe for about 10 and a half months. And he was a big eater. And so we ate a lot of food that we had never tried before. In England, it was Indian food. In France, it was Vietnamese food, but also French food and also English food. And in Italy, it was Italian food. In Greece, it was Greek food. And bit by bit, I learned to enjoy those different kinds of food. So then when we came back from Europe, I had a gourmet cookbook, which had all different kinds of food in it. And so I started cooking my own. And that sort of launched me into enjoying cooking and enjoying eating my own food and enjoying trying this and that. I still don't eat liver and onions though.
I don't either, and my mother loved them. So there's probably
Yeah.
more to that story as well.
My stepfather was from Alsace. His family was from Alsace, and they ate things that just blew me away, like tongue. But so I haven't gone that far. But I love all different. I love Mexican, Italian, Greek, a lot of different kinds of food.
Well, flavors and creativity and it sounds like just kind of connecting with other cultures through food. It's true, it leads to a rich and full life. So since you have such a rich and full life, you still have to make time for writing. And Dennis asks, please talk about your work routine and habits. For example, do you write every day? And how long can you write productively at one setting?
Well, I try to write always in the morning. So I get up and I read a few things on the news or online. And then I pick up where I left off the day before. And I try to put down maybe 1,200, 1,500 words. I take a day off, usually Sunday, sometimes Saturday, sometimes both. When I finish one day's work before I start the next day's work, I read what I wrote the day before to my husband, and he'll notice things that seem odd or maybe inaccurate to him. He's got a very practical mind, and I'll notice typos and spelling errors and stuff like that. And so when I have read what I wrote the day before I start, that's kind of pushes me and gets me going, gives me ideas. And then, I don't write as much as, say, Anthony Trollope did. I think he wrote 2,000 words a day, maybe more. I can't even remember. But then I get away from it and I ignore it and I don't pay any attention to it. Quite often I'll have an idea when I'm doing something else, like walking or riding a horse. So I'll text myself that idea so that I'll remember it. So thank goodness for cell phones. But, and then if I have to do some research, I'll do the research. I like doing research. So I just prefer doing it all in the morning rather than the afternoon.
So I was going to ask if when you were writing, there was space to kind of roam in your mind and that writing ideas might come to you. It sounds like that does happen.
Yeah, it's not that I'm thinking about it. It's just that the idea sort of comes to me. There's a lot of studies in creativity, and one of them, and several of them, show that if you're having a lot of thoughts about something, the best thing to do is go distract yourself and put all those thoughts away. And then that does something to your brain. It sort of hones down all those thoughts that were kind of, what's the word, contradictory. And then something comes to you and off you go. But I think it's important for a writer to not be judgmental about their own work, just to be curious about it. Because if you're judgmental, you'll shut yourself down. And it's up to the editor to be judgmental. So
that's a really wonderful thing to offer. And it goes along with this next question. And it's from Christine again, who is very happy to have your thoughts on optimism and said, the book abounds also in kindness. Know what's non-essential, generosity. Do you view animals that way? Humans, it's such a beautiful view. So kindness.
Well, that's my experience of the animals that I've had to deal with. They seem kind. We were just talking about this today when I was with my horse. I was having a lesson, and we were talking about one of the other horses, who shall go unnamed, who does seem to use certain opportunities to get back at the owner. God knows why. So then we were talking about the horse I was riding, and if he gets energetic or something like that, he doesn't try to hurt you. He doesn't try to get rid of you. He just gets energetic. And then if I say, okay, stop, you're okay, he sort of comes back to himself. So my experience of him and also of my other horses has been that they have been kind. My experience of the dogs, even the Jack Russells, has been that they've been kind to us, even if they haven't been especially kind to one another. So yeah, that's my experience of dogs. It's my experience of my family that I grew up in, and it's my experience of all 4 of my husbands, if you can believe that. All of them were essentially kind. So I guess I have a sort of optimistic view of life, which
And
maybe
you've
is
stayed
not,
friends with all of them, which is somewhat miraculous.
which
Speaks
that
to
has not, I have to say,
good
my
quality.
optimistic view of life has not prepared me for the last 4 years, but we have to deal what we have to deal with.
Okay, let me go to the next. The next question is from Joseph. And he says, you mentioned that you do a lot of research and that you're often surprised to find that things were or are different than you thought. Do you then change what you've been planning, or do you stick with the direction you thought you were going to go in?
No, I change. I want things to be as accurate as possible. Sometimes you have to make some kind of a compromise, but my experience is that accuracy is actually more inspiring than inaccuracy.
What a good
You
idea.
might read something that's contradictory to what you originally thought. You think, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. But then the ideas will come back, and they'll be around that more accurate thing.
Okay, and our next question is from Isabel. And she says, I was born and raised in the Monterey area. I look forward to reading your murder mystery. So, we're already pre-ordering. So, do you know when that's coming out?
No, my editor still is going over it. I'm gonna work on it in sometime in March, and then she'll decide.
How long does that editing process, that kind of conversation typically go on?
It changes from book to book. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's long. And it's not necessarily what you expect it's going to be, but you just have to deal with it and accept it.
So one of the questions that was submitted before we started talking tonight said that the Paris story seems tailor-made for films, and wondered if you had been approached or approached anyone about the idea of making it into a film.
Well, my Hollywood agent is trying her best, and I'm not going to reveal anything about that. I'm just going to knock on wood.
I mean, I can see their point. I think it would make a wonderful film. So we'll watch for that.
I hope so.
Just in case.
I hope so.
And one of the other things that someone asked is similar to a question that was asked before, which was, what's next in your writing? It sounds like this mystery might be next, but I have a feeling you have at least 3 balls in the air. So are there other ones that you're juggling?
Yeah, but I'm not ready to talk about any of those. I always like to have something going, and and lots of times I have more things going, that 2 or 3 things going at once.
When do you know that it's time to drop an idea? That you've gone a certain amount of the distance and you're like, not happening.
I've never dropped an idea, so I don't know.
So it comes, you decide it's what you want to do, you follow it, and
Well, that's sort of right and sort of wrong. I did have an idea when I was in college, and then when I was traveling in Europe, I had a bunch of ideas, and I dropped those. But it's been a long time since I dropped an idea.
And do you think that it's a different experience when you're writing a book for young adults? Is there something that you're do you approach it differently than when you're writing a novel? Or because I was surprised at how many you have written, and what pulled you into that?
Well, what pulled me into it is that when I moved to Carmel Valley, I discovered that there was a whole new way of training horses that had basically come to life around the valley and the Monterey Peninsula. And it fascinated me. And both of my main instructors when I first got here were influenced by that. It was started by the Dorrance brothers. Um, and so that fascinated me. And what I like about YA books, and I read a lot of books when I was a kid, is that they can be very straightforward. Mine aren't at all fantastical. There's one that has some fantastical elements, but it's because the character is seeing things in a weird way. And she learns that the things she makes her sort of worried are actually things that she can learn about, what actually happened. But it was fun writing them because they were straightforward. They were about things that happen to girls who love horses and are interested in horses. And I enjoyed them a lot. But the first six, bite my tongue. First five are about a girl who grows up on a horse farm and has to start teaching, not only schooling the horses, but teaching younger students. And then I wrote those and I thought those are fun. And then the next three, the last of which just came out this year, they're about one of her students who's much younger. She's only 9, I think, 9 or 10. And she is what my grandparents used to call contrary. And I totally loved writing about her because when I was a kid, I wanted to be contrary and I never was. So it was really fun to write about a contrary girl who really wants a horse more than anything else in the world. So
that connects to a question from Patricia, who says, I've often read that characters inform the writer as to the path a novel will take, whether it's a contrary girl or a curious filly. Do you find that to be true?
Absolutely.
And she says, especially across the 100-year trilogy.
Yes. For the trilogy, I knew that what kind of temperament the babies would have. And I knew where they lived and I knew what year they lived in. But I felt like my job was mostly just to set them on their feet and see where they wanted to go and follow them. And eventually, writing the trilogy came to seem like I was just sitting on the train with this family and listening to them talk to one another. They were on their own. They did what they wanted to do. And that was quite fun. I like that aspect. Not very many of probably maybe only 1,000 Acres has been planned out ahead of time. And that was because I knew I wanted to follow the plot of King Lear as best I could. But my normal way is to be more exploratory than that.
Well, I think we are at a point where we need to stop. So I'm going to say my thanks to you and thank you for this beautiful book, which does in fact bring joy and diversion and made me want to pay more attention to the birds that were cawing at each other in the backyard and my own dog on behind me. So thank you for this and all the beautiful stories. We're already looking forward to next year.
Thank
We're
you.
going to start thinking about Monterey.
Okay.
And to all the members, thank you for following us along tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Susan. And I hope your onion soup is délicieuse.
Thank you. And thank you very much for having me. It's always fun. Thank you.
It was fun. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Jane and Patsy. That was absolutely fabulous. What a wonderful interview. I feel like I just want to go on. Let's go get some wine. So thank you all for being with us tonight. And we did something a little different where we asked our members if they'd like to invite a friend tonight, and you did. We were with many friends, so we're very excited to welcome friends of the members. So thank you. And if you have any interest in joining, please go hop on the website and check out all that we have to offer. And just to remind you too that the book is available at the gift shop, at the museum shop. And if you're a member, you get 10% off. So a little motivating factor. So thank you again, Jane and Patsy. Thank you to Elena Hancock, who is the wizard behind the curtain, the technology curtain. and Melissa Modier, who is working hard to bring these type of programs to the members. So thank you all and have a great evening.